in the heart of a dense, untamed jungle, where sunlight barely touches the ground, an extraordinary tale of survival unfolds. This is the story of Kale, a majestic black stallion with a coat as dark as the night. Born free in the wild, Kale commands the respect of every creature in the jungle, until his world is shattered by the arrival of ruthless hunters seeking to claim him. Among the hunters is Arian, a skilled tracker haunted by his past and torn between his mission and a growing admiration for the spirited stallion. As Kale evades capture, the jungle itself seems to come alive, aiding him with its ancient secrets. From towering waterfalls to shadowy groves, the stallion leads Arian on a chase filled with danger, mystery, and unexpected bonds. But when a greater threat looms over the jungle, Kale and Arian must make an impossible choice: remain adversaries or unite to save their home. Prepare for a breathtaking adventure where bravery, freedom, and redemption collide. Will Kale's spirit triumph, or will the hunter claim his prize? Dive into Shadow of the Jungle, The Horse and the Hunter, for a tale you'll never forget. Scene opens with a wide aerial shot of a dense, untamed jungle at dawn. The camera pans over mist-covered treetops, where the calls of birds echo and the soft rustling of leaves signals the jungle awakening. The sound of a distant waterfall grows louder as we zoom in on a herd of wild horses racing across a lush clearing. Narrator, calm and inviting, in the heart of a forgotten jungle, where sunlight filters gently through emerald canopies, lived Kale, the pride of the wilderness, a black stallion with a coat as dark as midnight and eyes that gleamed like polished onyx. He was not just a leader to his herd. Kale was a legend. Kale gallops ahead of the herd, his mane flowing with the wind as he leaps over a fallen tree with effortless grace. His hooves strike the ground in perfect rhythm, exuding power and freedom. Narrator, building intensity, but Kale's world, boundless and untamed, was about to face a shadow from beyond the jungle's edge, a threat driven by greed and desperation. Cut to a small village at the edge of the jungle. The scene shifts to a group of rugged hunters preparing their tools, ropes, nets, and traps. The camera focuses on Arian, a weathered yet determined hunter, sharpening his blade. His expression is conflicted, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. Narrator, empathetic, Arian, known for his unmatched skill as a tracker, carried a burden heavier than his weapons. Haunted by memories of loss and failure, he lived a life chasing trophies to survive. And now, his sights were set on the jungle's most elusive prize, the legendary black stallion. A villager approaches Arian with a pouch of coins, tossing it into his hands. Villager, bring us the stallion, Arian, a creature like that will fetch a fortune, enough to last you a lifetime. Arian hesitates briefly, then nods. He gathers his team, and they set off toward the jungle. The screen transitions back to the wild, showing Kale standing atop a ridge, his ears twitching as he senses an unfamiliar presence in the distance. Narrator, dramatic, Kale's instinct warned him of danger. The jungle, his sanctuary, would soon become a battlefield. The hunters enter the jungle cautiously, cutting through dense undergrowth. The sound of snapping twigs and murmured conversations contrast sharply with the serenity of the wilderness. Arian stops, holding up a hand to signal silence. He kneels and examines fresh hoofprints on the ground. Arian, to himself, softly, he's close. The scene cuts to Kale leading his herd deeper into the jungle, away from the hunters. The camera alternates between the hunter's calculated pursuit and Kale's alert movements, building tension. Kale pauses near a waterfall, his reflection shimmering in the water as he drinks. Suddenly, he lifts his head, his ears swiveling. The camera cuts to Arian hiding behind foliage, watching the stallion with a mix of awe and determination. Narrator, whispering tone, in that moment, Arian saw more than a prize. He saw strength, beauty, and freedom embodied in a single creature. But admiration was not enough to change his path. Arian gestures to his team, signaling them to prepare a trap. They move quietly, spreading a net across the ground and covering it with leaves. Kale, still near the waterfall, snorts and stamps his hoof, sensing danger. He glances around, his muscles tensing. Narrator, intensifying. The jungle whispered its warnings to Kale. The rustling leaves, the sharp calls of birds. It was as though the wilderness itself sought to protect its champion. Kale turns and begins to trot away, but one of Arian's team members steps on a dry branch, causing a loud crack. Kale freezes, his ears flattening. Then, with a burst of energy, he bolts into the trees, the hunter scrambling to pursue him. Hunter shouting, "There he goes! Don't lose him!" The chase unfolds in a series of fast-paced shots. Kale weaves through dense trees, leaps over streams, and disappears into the shadows. The hunters struggle to keep up, tripping over roots and tangling in vines. Arian, however, stays focused, following the stallion's tracks with precision. Narrator, urgent. Kale ran as though the jungle itself carried him, his hooves striking the ground like thunder. But the hunters were relentless, their traps closing in with every step. Kale suddenly halts near a narrow gorge, the sound of rushing water below. He turns, his nostrils flaring as he scans for an escape. Behind him, Arian and his team close in, their nets ready. The tension builds as Arian steps forward, locking eyes with the stallion. Arian, calm but firm. "There's nowhere to run, is there? Come quietly, and it'll be easier for both of us." Kale rears up, his powerful neigh echoing through the jungle. Instead of retreating, he charges toward Arian, leaping over the trap at the last second. The hunters scatter, startled, as Kale disappears into the thick foliage once again. Hunter, frustrated. That beast is impossible to catch. Arian stands still, staring at the path Kale vanished down. His expression is unreadable, a mix of frustration and admiration. He turns to his team, his voice low. "Arian, we'll regroup tomorrow." He's not going far. The scene transitions to Kale returning to his herd, the stallion nudging a foal gently as if to reassure them. The camera pans to the moonlit jungle, the sounds of nocturnal animals filling the air. Narrator, reflective. Kale had escaped, but the hunter's shadows loomed closer. The jungle's balance was at stake, and the stallion's fight for freedom had only just begun. The screen fades to black, leaving viewers eager to see what happens next. Scene opens with a misty jungle morning. The camera captures dew-drenched leaves, faint sunlight piercing through the canopy, and distant bird calls. Kale, the black stallion, stands at the edge of a small clearing, his ears swiveling cautiously. Nearby, his herd grazes peacefully. Narrator, calm yet foreboding. Morning in the jungle brought no peace to Kale. Though the night had shielded him from his pursuers, the presence of the hunters still lingered, like a shadow over his freedom. The camera pans to Arian and his team at their camp. They sit around a small fire, discussing their strategy. Arian is sharpening a blade, his eyes distant and thoughtful. Hunter 1, confidently, "The traps are set, Arian. We'll corner him this time." Arian, calm but serious. "Kale is no ordinary animal. He knows this jungle better than we do. If we don't outthink him, we'll fail again." Another hunter scoffs, gesturing dismissively. Hunter 2, "It's just a horse. How hard can it be to catch it?" Arian looks up sharply, his voice firm. "Arian, that horse has outsmarted every one of us so far. If you underestimate him again, he'll make a fool of you." The group falls silent. Arian picks up his bow and stands, signaling the others to move out. The screen transitions to the hunters trekking deeper into the jungle, their boots crunching on the forest floor. Narrator dramatic. Arian and his team pressed on, determined to capture the stallion. But Kale was not alone in this fight. The jungle had its own way of protecting its own. The camera cuts to Kale moving through the jungle with his herd. A small bird chirps loudly and flutters past him, as if warning of nearby danger. Kale pauses, his nostrils flaring, and scans the surroundings. The hunters approach a narrow ravine. Arion raises a hand, stopping the group. He kneels and examines faint hoofprints leading toward the ravine. Arion, softly, he's close. Get the nets ready. The hunters spread out, silently setting up their traps. Kale, sensing something is amiss, nudges his herd toward the safety of a nearby grove. He remains behind, watching the ravine warily. Narrator, intense. Kale's instincts were sharp, but the hunters had laid their snares carefully. Every step closer to freedom led him toward danger. Kale cautiously approaches the ravine. The camera shows a nearly invisible net stretched across the ground, hidden under leaves. As Kale steps forward, the tension builds. Suddenly, his hoof brushes against a tripwire. The net snaps upward, and Kale is momentarily entangled. He thrashes wildly, his powerful kicks breaking branches and sending leaves flying. The hunters rush forward, ropes in hand. Hunter 1, excitedly, "We've got him! Quick, tie him down!" Arion stays back, watching Kale struggle with a conflicted expression. Kale rears up, his eyes blazing with fury, and with a final burst of strength, he snaps the net and breaks free. The hunters stumble back as Kale gallops away into the dense foliage. Hunter 2, angrily, "How did he do that? No animal is that strong." Arion exhales slowly, his voice quiet but firm. "Arion, he's more than just an animal. This is his home. The jungle gives him strength." The screen transitions to Kale sprinting through the jungle, his coat glistening with sweat. The camera zooms in on his determined expression, then pans to the hunters regrouping in frustration. Narrator, reflective. Kale's escape was more than luck. It was a testament to his will to survive. But the hunters' determination grew with every failure, and the chase was far from over. The next scene shows Arion alone, sitting on a fallen log as his team rests nearby. He stares into the distance, lost in thought. Narrator, empathetic. While his team plotted Kale's capture, Arion's mind wandered. Something about the stallion stirred feelings he hadn't confronted in years. Memories of a time when he valued life over profit. A flashback sequence begins, showing a younger Arion on a quiet farm. He's tending to a horse, smiling gently as the animal nuzzles him. The scene shifts to a raging fire consuming the barn. Arion's frantic attempts to save the horses fail, leaving him kneeling in the ashes devastated. The flashback ends abruptly, bringing Arion back to the present. His expression hardens as he looks at his team. Arion, to himself, "This isn't just about the money anymore." Cut to Kale resting with his herd near a tranquil stream. A young foal approaches him, nuzzling his side. Kale lowers his head, touching the foal gently with his nose. The moment is interrupted by the distant sound of snapping branches. Kale lifts his head sharply, his ears swiveling. The camera cuts to Arion and his team approaching quietly, their shadows moving between the trees. Narrator, urgent. The jungle's peace was fleeting. Danger closed in from all sides, and Kale's fight for freedom grew more desperate with each passing moment. Kale moves to the front of the herd, leading them deeper into the jungle. The hunters quicken their pace, the gap between predator and prey narrowing. Tension builds as the screen alternates between Kale's calculated movements and the hunter's pursuit. The scene ends with a cliffhanger as Arion spots Kale through a gap in the trees, their eyes locking once more. The screen fades to black. Narrator, anticipatory. The chase was far from over. As hunter and prey raced through the jungle, the line between them began to blur, and soon, both would face a choice that would change their lives forever. The scene opens with the hunters trudging through the dense jungle. Arion leads the group, his movements quiet but purposeful. Sweat drips from his brow as his eyes scan the forest ahead. Narrator, reflective. As Arion and his team pursued Kale deeper into the jungle, the boundaries between hunter and hunted grew increasingly blurred. Each step brought them closer to the heart of the wilderness, where nature's laws ruled supreme. Arian suddenly raises his hand, signaling the group to stop. The camera zooms in on faint hoofprints in the mud. The hunters crouch around the prints, whispering. Hunter 1, whispering, "He's close. Look at the tracks. They're fresh." Hunter 2, nervously, "This jungle feels alive. It's like it's protecting him." Arian doesn't respond, his focus locked on the trail ahead. He gestures for the group to move silently. The camera shifts to Kale, standing atop a small ridge overlooking the hunters. His dark coat gleams in the sunlight, his piercing eyes watching every movement below. Kale turns and leads his herd deeper into the jungle, weaving through thick undergrowth and crossing a shallow stream. A younger mare stumbles, letting out a soft neigh. Kale stops and nudges her forward gently. Narrator, admiring. Kale was more than a leader. He was a guardian. Every member of his herd was under his care, and he would risk everything to keep them safe. The hunters continue their pursuit, now moving faster. One of them steps on a hidden vine, triggering a cascade of falling branches. The loud noise startles a flock of birds, which take off in a flurry of wings. Arian freezes, clenching his jaw. Arian, quietly, to himself, careless. The jungle punishes carelessness. The noise alerts Kale, who stops abruptly. His ears twitch as he listens intently. He sniffs the air and neighs softly, warning his herd to keep moving. Kale lingers, standing guard. Back with the hunters, Arian kneels by the disturbed vine, his brow furrowing. Arian, to the group, he knows we're coming. We've lost the element of surprise. Hunter 1, frustrated. Then we need to move faster. He can't keep running forever. Arian stands, his gaze distant. Arian, thoughtfully, it's not just about running. Kale knows this jungle like it's a part of him. We're the outsiders here. The hunters push forward, but their movements are slower and more cautious. The camera cuts to Kale leading his herd into a dense thicket. Vines hang like curtains, and the air is heavy with the scent of damp earth. Kale pauses and looks back, his breath visible in the cool air. He neighs softly, urging the herd to keep moving. A sudden rustling sound makes him tense. The camera shifts to Arian, who has spotted Kale through the foliage. Their eyes meet for a fleeting moment. Narrator, dramatic. In that brief moment, Arian and Kale locked eyes. Two beings, driven by instincts and survival, yet bound by something deeper, a shared understanding of the struggle for freedom. Before Arian can signal his team, Kale bolts, disappearing into the undergrowth. The hunters give chase, but the jungle slows their progress. Thorns snag their clothes, and hidden roots trip their steps. Hunter 2, grumbling. This place is a maze. He's playing with us. Arian stops and looks around, noticing the subtle signs Kale has left behind. Broken branches, disturbed leaves. Arian to himself, no! He's leading us somewhere. The scene shifts to Kale guiding his herd into a hidden clearing surrounded by towering trees. A sparkling waterfall cascades into a crystal-clear pool, its serene beauty a stark contrast to the tension of the chase. Narrator, softer. Kale had led his herd to a sanctuary, a place untouched by the chaos of the outside world. But even here, danger lurked in the shadows. Kale turns and stands at the edge of the clearing, his body tense and alert. The camera cuts to Arian and his team, who have reached the edge of the sanctuary. Arian holds up a hand, signaling the others to stay back. Arian, whispering, wait, don't rush in. This isn't just a clearing. It's his refuge. Hunter 1, impatiently, so what? We've got him cornered. Arian's expression hardens, his voice low but commanding. Arian, if you charge him recklessly, you'll spook the herd and lose him for good. Follow my lead. The hunters reluctantly nod, their movements slowing as they approach the clearing. Kale watches them, his muscles coiled like a spring. The camera alternates between Kale's intense gaze and Arian's cautious movements. Narrator, building tension. The air was thick with anticipation. Both sides knew that a single misstep could change everything. As the hunters inch closer, Kale suddenly lets out a powerful neigh. The herd responds, scattering in all directions. Kale charges forward, his hooves thundering against the ground. The hunters scramble, trying to contain the chaos. Arion steps forward, his bow drawn, but he hesitates. Kale barrels past him, their eyes meeting once again. Arion lowers his bow, watching Kale disappear into the jungle. Hunter 1, angrily, "Why didn't you take the shot? We had him." Arion doesn't respond immediately. He looks down at the arrow in his hand, then back at the forest where Kale vanished. Arion quietly, "Some things aren't meant to be captured." The camera lingers on Arion's conflicted expression as the jungle falls silent once more. The scene transitions to Kale leading his herd through the trees, their figures fading into the distance. Narrator, reflective, the chase had ended, but its echoes lingered in the hearts of both man and beast. Arion and Kale, two forces of nature, had crossed paths and left each other changed forever. The jungle grew silent as Arion watched Kale vanish into the dense trees, his herd following close behind. Lowering his bow, Arion sighed, realizing that some battles weren't meant to be won. The hunters, frustrated but understanding, retreated, leaving the sanctuary untouched. Kale led his herd to safety, his resolve unbroken. In that fleeting moment, both Arion and Kale had learned a profound truth. Respect for freedom transcends the boundaries of man and beast. As the jungle reclaimed its calm, Arion smiled, knowing he had made the right choice. Kale galloped on, a symbol of unyielding spirit and untamed freedom.